Hello, I'm Jorge Varela for thebuttonsmashers.com, and here's my video review of the King of Fighters 14 for PlayStation 4. Now, before I begin the review, I want to give you guys a bit of a disclaimer. Actually, no, a big disclaimer. I love to play fighting games all the time, and I have reviewed fighting games before, actually. However, that does not mean that I am a competitive player or that I have any knowledge about the complexities that they are looking for in games like these. So I am, without a doubt, a casual fighting game player, like an actual, real, just straight up casual fighting game player. If you're coming into this review looking for an in-depth analysis on the invincibility frames or whatever, or a rant on how King of Fighters 98 will always be better than anything else, you're kind of in the wrong place. Go somewhere else, and or at the very least go into it with that kind of mindset. And so here we go. The short version of this review goes like this. Is the same King of Fighters as always, and even more accessible than before, which is always a good thing. However, I don't understand why they felt the need to make the game 3D, since it doesn't really add anything other than to make the game slower and look less interesting. So, on the other hand, if it weren't 3D, it probably wouldn't even get half of the attention it has gotten now that I think about it. But if you want a King of Fighters game for PS4, then here it is, and it's perfectly solid. But I'd rather play any of the other previous titles over this one. Well, that's the shorter version of the review. If you want to stick around for longer and listen to the entire thing, then sit tight, because here we go. For some reason, I never really got into the King of Fighters as a kid. In my eyes, it always looked like Street Fighter for cool people, and I definitely was not one of them. Whenever I saw kids older than me play it at an arcade, I always thought that the series only belonged to people that knew what a quarter circle attack was, or folks who understood the significance of mix-ups and reversals. Obviously, that wasn't the case, and it's even further enforced now thanks to the King of Fighters 14, the newest SNK fighting game that now boasts some brand new 3D graphics, some new characters, and added accessibility for newcomers. If any of you are aware as to how King of Fighters works, then you've pretty much played this game already. After going back and playing some previous games in the franchise like King of Fighters 13 and of course the famous King of Fighters 98, I noticed that there wasn't that much of a difference in the fighting, other than the fact that it was slightly slower than the sprite-based predecessors, mostly due to the animations of the 3D models. I quickly got used to it, however, as the learning curve wasn't that tough to begin with, and all the moves that you would expect are still intact in this game. But if you do feel like you need some guidance, then there is a very simple tutorial that shows you the basics, along with one very useful button. This button in question is none other than the square button. There have been other fighting games like Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, the BlazBlue series, and Guilty Gear XIV who have their own stylish mode, in which casual players can simply mash on this one button to automatically activate combos and cool looking attacks. So this stylish mode was created for the purpose of making people feel good when playing games like these, even if they don't know any advanced techniques or anything. And King of Fighters 14 is no exception. However, the big difference here is that this is not a mode that you can turn on or off to make this happen. Instead, it is fully integrated into the fighting system. And initially I thought this would be a problem, since I visualized myself accidentally activating the stylish mode if I pressed square one too many times, without being able to turn that feature off if I really wanted to. Fortunately, I never had that problem, because the game is really good at telling when you want to create your own original combos and when you simply want to mash the button to get your enemy out of your face quickly. Switching from one style to the other is very smooth, especially when your opponent has very little health left and you just want to get rid of them very quickly and enjoy some flashy attacks. And speaking of flashy visuals, I would like to address the huge elephant in the room and start talking about the graphical changes from 2D to 3D that were made in this game, which personally, I'm not a big fan of. My main issue with the graphical changes is that I don't feel that they do anything to further improve the King of Fighters experience. If anything, it seems like it deters from it by desperately trying to draw attention to itself by doing this change, on top of the fact that the gameplay feels way slower than its predecessors because of it. The cynical side of me likes to think that SNK saw popular titles in the genre like Street Fighter 4, Guilty Gear XIV, and even smaller ones like Koihime Embu and Blade Arcus from Shining Battle Arena, and thought that they needed to follow on their footsteps in order to be relevant. Whenever I think about SNK, I think awesome sprite art and memorable art direction, and they completely ruined that winning streak by following the trends that employed this bland, forgettable change that will not withstand the test of time, unlike all of the previous games they've done whose art style still holds up to this day. All of the games that I mentioned previously do have 3D models and artistic changes that make sense and further improve the game, while King of Fighters 14 feels like it has 3D simply because everyone else was doing it. Imagine a small child that wants a toy that the rest of his friends also have. He doesn't understand what the toy even is, what it does, or why it's even popular in the first place. All he knows is that he wants it, so as to not be left out or be deemed irrelevant by his friends, even though he already had a bunch of cool toys at his house that are way better and more long-lasting than this fleeting trend that he's chasing. That's what the 3D graphics in the King of Fighters 14 feels like to me. Even the backgrounds look way less interesting than in the previous games, which had sprite art that always seemed full of life and movement. I can only remember about 2 stages in this game that I thought were cool, which I struggle to think about any other stage that I would denominate as memorable in any way. Whenever these characters are not fighting, depending on which character you pin against the other, there will be some dialogue scenes involved, where their expressions and animations feel really stiff and cheap, almost like figurines that were placed in different poses. Most of the characters will look like knockoff Barbie and Ken dolls that will make you feel like you're playing Street Fighter 4, but with King of Fighters characters modded onto it. There are also some cutscenes from the game's story mode that looks like they were taken straight out of Knack, and look just a tad inconsistent with what most of the game ends up looking like. Now, speaking of inconsistency, the story mode in question is also the blandest thing you will ever see in this game, with very typical and played out story beats that you can see in literally every single fighting game that has ever had a fighting tournament in it. It doesn't help that whenever you beat the story mode with each of the established teams, you get a special ending cutscene for them. The problem here is that these cutscenes are not 3D or fully voice acted at all. Instead, they are 2D still images with zero voice acting, despite the fact that not 2 minutes ago there were cutscenes in the game that were the exact opposite of that. The actual contents of the cutscene are nothing to write home about either. Some of them are incredibly vague and nonsensical attempts at a story, while others are very tired anime cliches and comedy relief. Now don't get me wrong, I love me some anime. But hey, even I can tell when something is just so tired and played out and I'm like, man, they seriously weren't trying at all, right? Needless to say, getting every single ending is a complete waste of time, and I don't recommend you going out of your way to get all of them, unless you were intending to play with all the characters anyway. Speaking of the characters, on a much more brighter note, I enjoyed playing as everyone a great deal, mostly due to the aforementioned square button that allowed me to see most of their moves without much effort. All of the new characters feel right at home with the rest of the cast. Sometimes they would fit in so well that I would sometimes stop and think if any of these people had actually appeared in previous games. Old or new, they felt like King of Fighters characters and none of them seemed like they didn't belong, with a huge amount of fun to be had in playing as all of them and combining them into different teams. If there is anything else that I feel I should point out is the severe lack of different game modes to play. There is a story mode, a versus mode, and the typical survival time attack challenges that you get in most fighting games nowadays, and of course you have online play, but there really isn't much else after that. All of those are the bare minimum, at least in my opinion. But considering that there are other games out there like BlazBlue that have about like 10 to 15 modes, and even Mortal Kombat that has like a full-on dungeon crawling minigame, I feel it is about time that we stop feeling so complacent and actually start demanding more creative modes from these kinds of games. Like at least like minigames or something, anything. But I really hate it when I see games that just have like story, arcade, versus online, and that's it. Which is especially aggravating for people like me who have absolutely zero interest in ever fighting with anybody online. Overall, despite my negativity on the visual aspects of this game and its story, it is still a King of Fighters game through and through. Save a little bit of balancing here and there, it is still pretty much the same game, which means it is an incredibly entertaining fighting game that still contains the same combat mechanics and characters that we have come to know and love, but with a newer coat of paint, for better or for worse. I think it is a solid experience, especially if any of you have been clamoring for a King of Fighters game on PS4. However, I think back at my recent visits to the older games in the series as a way to prepare for this review, and I think that I would never replace any of those for this new one. Again, I enjoyed myself quite a bit with this game, and I am fully planning on jumping back into it from time to time, but that'll only serve as a warm-up for whenever I inevitably start wasting my weekends on either King of Fighters 13 on my PS3 or King of Fighters 98 on Steam. I like it, but not that much. Thank you very much for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to give this video a like, and of course you can go to our website, thebuttonsmashers.com. We do news, we do reviews, and if you're a fan of podcasts, then be sure to visit that site because we have a lot of them. All of that content is created by really fun people that love what they do, so we highly appreciate your support.